My first question, I guess, for you today is about EU regulation. So as we all know, the EU is currently trying to regulate facial recognition technology, and obviously we can list many reasons why that is important. However, I'm just wondering now, how time-proof, in a way, do you think these regulation attempts are? Because as we can see, facial recognition technology is moving at a very galloping pace. We're developing these technologies year by year. And do you think that the regulations that the EU is trying to produce right now would still be effective in a few years?
Yeah, thank you. So in terms of being time-proof, in a sense, nobody can really guess what the technology will be able to do in 10 years. But I think it's safe to say that, at least when it comes to face recognition, we will be able to recognize people from their faces. I mean, when the technology first started, like, algorithms started coming out in face recognition even in the 70s. So it's not a new technology. People have been working on it for over 50 years now. And the early algorithms, they were able to recognize people when it was, let's say, a small set of people. Maybe I can recognize your face in a set of 100 people. And then when the lighting conditions are good, when I have a frontal face, and when you're not smiling or you're not wearing makeup. Now the technology is advancing, right? So I can recognize your face on a low resolution camera. Maybe instead of 100 people, I can now go to a database of 1 billion people and I can still point out which one is your face. And for example, in China, if you're passing under a red light with your car driving 90 miles or 70 miles an hour, you can still be recognized with a camera that looks at the car, and your face may be associated with your license plate, because we can also read that. So the technology will improve, and this is also true for deep fakes, right? I think it's safe to assume that in a near future, everybody will be able to create a perfect replica of someone else and let them say something. Maybe the voice will also be adapted to that. So then the question becomes, so what do we regulate? It's not the technological part, or it's not the research that we need to regulate, because that's kind of like a collaborative effort. I mean, all over the world, people are working on these technologies, and they're not specific to face recognition, right? I mean, what fuels face recognition is deep learning, for example, and that's you cannot say, okay, we're stopping the work on deep learning. That's not going to happen. That's not realistic to assume. But it's good to know that technology will make some new affordances. So, for example, in case of biometrics, the basic biometric scenario is that some data is recorded from you, and you go to a database, a biometric database with it, and you search for this person. Okay. And then you identify the person. So biometrics is basically identifying you with something you have. This can be your face, but it can also be your fingerprint, for example. And fingerprints in the past have been associated with crime scenes, so there was some stigmatization. So in the 90s, when people were working on fingerprint recognition, they said, okay, we are extracting these features from a fingerprint, and we're just going to store these features in the database. That means nobody will be able to put your fingerprint anywhere, even if the database is compromised. Which was a nice assumption, but eventually technology caught up. So somebody developed an algorithm which was able to reconstruct a fingerprint from those features. So then if the database is compromised, then people will be able to create, let's say, a plastic fingerprint of yours and leave your print everywhere, for example. So one problem is that as technology advances, new possibilities are becoming available. And it's very difficult to foresee what is going to be available. And the second thing is that maybe you regulate one technology, but it's very difficult to see what in conjunction with other technologies can be done. Right? So if I fuse like face recognition with other technologies, and that is a more challenging thing. But on the other hand, regulation is extremely important, and the face recognition technology, the market is growing. It's expected to reach $10 billion in 3 years. So the companies that rely, that want to sell this technology also expect the governments and EU to regulate this technology, because at one point it becomes an issue of trust, right? I mean, recently Facebook had to settle a court case in Illinois for $650 million because when they were tagging photographs on Facebook without getting explicit consent from the users. And in Illinois, there was a law that regulated this. So it was turned into a class action, and Facebook had to settle this with all the people affected. But only the people in Illinois benefited from this, let's say, because there was an existing law to regulate this. So if we have laws like this guiding the companies for ethical behavior and for privacy-aware processing, and that's a win-win for both sides, because the companies will also be much more comfortable pushing technology in this kind of space. But the risk is, of course, whitewashing of the technology by some weak regulations, or there may be holes in the regulations and the laws. We may not foresee some creative uses of technology. And for example, very recently in Moscow, the underground system, they are introducing face recognition-based payments. Okay. Right? So you just go there, it's very convenient, you just show your face and the payment is done. What if we develop adversarial makeup, which, with a few touches, the face recognition algorithm perceives me as someone else who's registered in the system, right? So there may be very creative misuses of technology also, and it's very difficult, it's very challenging to guess what's going to go.
I would say definitely. I mean, I just recently remember reading about a case where somebody was using the facial recognition to open their iPhone, and when she was wearing makeup, the iPhone perceived her as a different person versus when she wasn't wearing anything. So I think you definitely highlighted the potential loophole, let's say, in this technology. But I was also wondering, because you do mention the idea of loopholes in a way, and you also mentioned, let's say, American legislation, what's going on. Do you believe that we should be aiming for some sort of golden standard, in a way, sort of global golden standard? Because you do mention Facebook, you do mention what's happening in Russia. These are all states outside of the EU. So you can also wonder, let's say we do create some fantastic regulations at the EU level, but what do we do if these companies, which are multinational in a way, do some things differently or process your data in a way outside of this regulated area? How do you think it would be possible to reach a sort of common regulation globally?
So it's a very challenging question, I guess, also for the people who are developing the laws, because a lot of these multinational companies, they, for example, keep their data somewhere, they process it somewhere else, and Facebook may say, for example, oh, I'm not, I don't obey your laws because my data is in this country. So it's actually not within your jurisdiction. So at what level this needs to be regulated is also a question. With cloud computing and with 5G, for example, you have very fast transfer of data. So what does this imply in terms of processing, right? Now, in other areas, we see similar things. A lot of companies moving their headquarters to different countries to evade taxes, for example. So you create a legal situation, and then a bunch of clever people sit together and say, okay, how do we exploit this? For generating something that is all-encompassing, that's, I think, going to be extremely difficult, because we have also a lot of local contexts. And we see this very clearly, for example, when we look at the culture in China and in Europe. And it's useful to mention here that a lot of our Chinese students in the Netherlands, they went back to China during the pandemic because they were not very happy about how the government was controlling the situation here in the Netherlands. In China, they were much more strict in terms of freedoms given to people, but the Chinese people felt much more safe because those restrictions were also trading off safety with these freedoms. So it's a cultural thing, what the people demand from their government, how much power they're willing to give to their government, and what the governments will do with this power, that's very contextualized. But of course, the regulations should pay attention. I mean, even within EU, of course, there are many different countries with different styles and demands and ways of doing things. But one thing that needs to be always considered is that even if the government is super benevolent and the citizens are very happy to donate their data or let a portion of their life being regulated by the government, there may come a time when an authoritarian government or autocratic government replaces that benevolent government, and all the past data is still available in the system. So what's going to happen then, right? Will they, for example, use it to perpetuate their reign? And that's a very, very real concern. Face recognition is not the only biometric, but it has certain properties that make it dangerous in terms of public rights. So, for example, if you have, let's say, an opposition rally or a political demonstration, facial recognition gives the government the ability to identify every person who attends these rallies. So that's, in gait recognition or in voice recognition or in fingerprint recognition, you don't have that kind of risk. So in terms of biometric, that's a very significant risk. But on the other hand, you may say that when it comes to surveillance, face recognition is not the most dangerous technology, and I would certainly agree with that. I mean, your mobile phone knows where you are at all times, and in some countries, governments are legally allowed to access this information. In Israel, mobile call detail records are open to the government. In some countries, I will not name them, this is done illegally, right? So the law does not permit, but the government does it anyway. And if there is no independent judicial system, then there is no checks and balances over the government. So the government can do whatever they want. So what they do with this kind of data, well, this is very difficult to foresee. They can combine it with all kinds of other stuff. So there are a couple of principles which we use in the design of systems, and they can be very helpful to control the damage. Function creep is something we pay attention to. For example, you enter a public space with your face, and then, from the yellow tint in your eyes, we see that you have a liver problem. So should this information travel to your health insurance company, for example? That's function creep. You create a system for a specific purpose, but the data then travels on. Another one, a very important principle, is privacy by design and default. And that's, you collect the data in a way that even if the data are compromised, there's going to be no consequences. For example, we did a very sensitive project with refugees in Turkey, where we collected mobile phone data, but we aggregated and anonymized the data to such a level that, even if you have the data, you will not be able to track individuals. Are all the risks gone with this kind of processing? Maybe not. So you have to really think about all the possible scenarios and cover all your bases. But if you want to regulate like the EU wants to do it, they also have to maintain a very close watch on what's going on, because people will come up with addressing things in the loopholes, exploiting the gaps. And just the fact that we have a regulation should not make us extremely comfortable. We should keep the vigilance and update the regulations.
Exactly, and you just mentioned people and people's attitudes. I was also wondering if you think that there is any chance that the attitude of people will evolve over time. So right now we see, let's say, in comparison with China, we see more people skeptical, let's say, of this sort of technology and the danger that it has in Europe. Do you think this could change in a way as this technology progresses? Do you think people might become more accustomed to it or less likely to believe that it's dangerous and use it a bit more?
Yeah, it's definitely that people's behavior, of course, changes depending on what technology is out there. I mean, if in refugee camps where there is drone surveillance, you see that people's behavior on the streets have changed. So they want to avoid open spaces. They stick to places where they know that the drone will not be able to see them. Especially in the Middle East, where the drones also have strike capabilities. It's a constant threat of death hovering over people. And it's also psychologically depressing, of course. There's also a psychological impact. But you can see that their ordinary behavior is changing. The polls show that overall there is a decreasing trust in technology. And this happens because, of course, in the media we see the problematic cases much more prominently. For example, face recognition technology was used in the US for identifying criminals. Thousands of people have been apprehended. Also, thousands of people were cleared from charges using face recognition technology, so it has a very positive impact. But there were 2 cases in which a person was arrested mistakenly used by the misuse of face recognition technology. In both cases, the people who are using the technology, the supervisors, let's say, were found guilty. So the responsibility did not end with the algorithm, but it was tied to a human being in the end. But these cases were much more publicized in the media, and it created a lot of backlash. So a lot of, there were moratoria placed on face recognition technology in different states, etc. So people's opinions are colored by the way this is framed in the media, and sometimes the benefits are kind of disregarded. But perhaps this is healthy because, the public debate is extremely useful. The public debate exerts an influence over the politicians, who then have to take policy decisions and then can regulate the corporations and also the government, of course.
Yes, and I was just wondering now, because you just mentioned, I guess, policy and regulation, just to wrap it up, I guess, how apt do you think the current political class is at understanding this and regulating this? Because it might be a sort of generational gap. Many of these people are maybe not that familiar with technology. So do you think that it is possible to have legitimate expectations that they can understand it and regulate it?
Yeah, this is a very good question. I mean, in the Netherlands, for example, I know that there are special classes for the lawyers, for the prosecutors, for the judges, both in, for example, probability and statistics, but also in technology. But from my experiences in Turkey, for example, I know that when you are a judge, it means you are already a senior person, right? So there is a generation gap, and it's very difficult to really understand what the technology is capable of. And we have seen many cases where technology was not fully grasped by the people who ultimately decide on judicial cases. That's a real risk. But you can also ask this question about the general population. Does the general population really understand the implications when they consent to using a specific technology? When they say, okay, I'm not going to use cash, but I'm going to carry this card all the time. Then what happens is when the government decides to take you out of the system, they can do it with a snap of a finger, right? All of a sudden you find all your wealth gone because everything is tied to a card, and when that's cancelled, it's over for you. So the risks of technology, I think we have to educate the people, and that's partly on the scientists, I think, responsibility-wise.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.